Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Excellencies, energy is essential to ensure access to safe drinking water, while water is fundamental to energy production. However, market-driven energy models and strategies for privatization and commodification of water prioritize economic profit over environmental integrity and human rights. We need a just transition for both water and energy focused on human rights, the protection of aquatic ecosystems, and the fight against climate change. Large dams, new large dams, for hydroelectric power generation often flood inhabited valleys and cause severe environmental impacts. Thermal power stations, in addition to contribute significantly to climate change, emit sulfur and nitrogen oxides and cause acid rain. Nuclear power plants require large reserves of water and pose severe risks that make it unacceptable to use the downstream flows to supply safe drinking water. Even the development of clean alternative energies, such as wind, solar, biofuel, and green hydrogen, depends on the limited availability of non-renewable raw materials, generates severe social impacts in the extraction of critical minerals, and poses risks to food production. Furthermore, the unlimited growth in energy demand outlines an unsustainable future in terms of climate change and the degradation of aquatic ecosystems. Regarding water, we face serious problems of overexploitation of aquifers, which should be our strategic reserve for managing increasingly frequent extraordinary droughts. On the other hand, systematic toxic pollution is progressively poisoning hundreds of millions of people every day. In 2018, the WHO estimated that 2 billion people lacked guaranteed access to safe drinking water, the vast majority of whom are not properly thirsty people without water in their living environment, but impoverished people who live alongside rivers or on top of contaminated aquifers, or whose water is hoarded by powerful actors for their productive activities. In terms of energy, around 1 billion people still lack access to electricity, and more than 1.5 billion rely on solid biomass as fuel for unhealthy cooking, which caused estimated 6.7 million deaths in 2020, disproportionately affecting women and children. In response to arguments about scarcity to justify these figures, I insist that guaranteeing the human right to drinking water requires less than 5% of the water we extract from nature. And similarly, the clean and sustainable energy needed to ensure a decent life represents only a small fraction of total energy demand. We need to prioritize human rights and basic needs for all, while curbing unsustainable growth in demand for water and energy. The uncontrolled and unregulated development of mega data centers under unacceptable opacity and secrecy is extremely worrying, as it is causing a dramatic increase in electricity consumption and significant new demands for water. Regarding water, the most worrying aspect is the lack of transparency in the contracts signed, which likely obscures the fact that these users could have top priority in times of scarcity over needs and functions of high social or environmental value. However, without a doubt, the most significant risks arise from electricity consumption, which is already outpacing the development of alternative sources, such as wind, for instance, and solar, that can be used to power these mega data centers instead of being used for the energy transition. In fact, the large corporations involved declare they need more and more energy and are relaunching nuclear power, large hydroelectric dams, and thermal power plants with the corresponding impacts on aquatic ecosystems and human rights linked to water management, while undermining agreed climate change mitigation plans. In this context, we need a dual just transition in water and energy. The massive emission of greenhouse gases, particularly CO2, as is well known, requires that the energy transition be the central axis for mitigation strategies. However, the main social risks and impacts materialize through the water cycle, which necessitates adaptation strategies guided by a water transition. To develop this dual transition, in addition to applying the principle of sustainability, we must ensure a just transition based on the principle of equity, adopting a human rights-based approach that pays special attention to those living in most vulnerable situations. The energy transition, beyond changing supply sources and improving efficiency, must also include a change in consumption patterns that slows down the growth in demand. Concerning water, ensuring a sustainable future requires restoring and preserving the health of aquatic ecosystems, respecting the limits imposed by the natural order under the horizon outlined by climate change in relation to the water cycle. Promoting a just dual transition from a human rights perspective requires regulating and even decoupling the right to water and energy from market logic, so that even those who struggle to pay the tariff can have access to them. Prioritize public budgets and available resources to ensure the progressive realization of these rights for all. An adequate regulation that guarantees transparency, social participation and public accountability in both water and energy management. To this end, based on the recognition of the human right to water and sanitation, recognizing the human right to energy would provide a normative basis for moving toward alternative models of energy governance. Within the framework of the report's recommendation, I would like to encourage the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and all related UN agencies, as well as the 2026 UN Water Conference, to promote this dual water and energy transition by explicitly aligning with human rights treaties and mechanisms, including financial mechanisms. Finally, given the alarming development of mega data centers, I recommend promote a moratorium and provide clear information on water and energy demands so that the sector can be regulated on this basis, prioritizing the principles of sustainability, equity and respect for human rights. Alors, en français, Monsieur le Vice-président, en ce qui concerne ma visite à Guinée-Bissau, du 10 au 19 mars, je remercie tout d'abord le gouvernement pour l'invitation et pour sa coopération. La Guinée-Bissau est un petit pays extrêmement vulnérable au changement climatique où la majorité de la population vit dans une extrême pauvreté. Son climat tropical est caractérisé par une saison de pluie et une saison sèche. La population dépend principalement des eaux souterraines, mais l'élévation progressive du niveau de la mer salinise les aquifères des îles et des zones côtières, forçant le déplacement de certaines communautés. Dans mon rapport, je recommande de développer des stratégies de récupération et stockage des eaux de pluie pendant la saison humide, comme au Cap-Vert ou dans le Sertão brésilien. Je recommande aussi de développer des stratégies de recherche induite des aquifères pendant la saison des pluies. Quoi qu'il en soit, le principal problème réside dans la contamination biologique des eaux souterraines due à l'absence d'assainissement des eaux usées et à l'absence de chloration de l'eau. Même à la capitale, l'eau n'est pas chlorée. J'ai été choqué d'apprendre que les enfants des communautés riveraines du fleuve Corubal urinent du sang à cause de l'eau prétendument contaminée par l'exploitation minière en Guinée. J'ai également vu le fleuve Bidigor asséché par la construction d'un barrage au Sénégal. J'encourage donc le Sénégal, la Guinée et la Guinée-Bissau à mettre en œuvre la Convention des Nations Unies sur l'eau. Le plus précieux trésor de la Guinée-Bissau est son aquifère. Mais elle possède aussi d'autres trésors sociaux, l'organisation communautaire de ces communautés rurales et même de villes comme Bafata, ainsi que son vaste réseau d'écoles et de centres de santé. Dans mon rapport final, je recommande de renforcer cette organisation communautaire et de promouvoir un programme de développement de l'assainissement et de la chloration de l'eau, en s'appuyant sur ce réseau d'écoles et de centres de santé et en soutenant les femmes dans la conduite de ce programme. Merci bien.